on flexible budget using Excel. So in the last class we have seen how to solve problems on cash budget. So today we'll continue with the flexible budget. So myself, Professor Mahesh Bendigiri from Global Business School, Hubli. Okay, so on my left hand side we have a problems on flexible budgets. So we are going to solve 4 problems on flexible budget. So whenever you are solving problems on flexible budget, we need to understand so what is how the costs are going to be categorized. So normally in case of flexible budget, we need to understand there are 3 things. One is about fixed overheads, okay, the variable overhead and semi-variable overhead, or in other words fixed cost, variable cost and semi-variable cost. So the nature of variable cost is the per unit of variable cost is going to remain same. So as the level of activity increases or decreases, but the total variable cost is going to vary accordingly. So the nature of fixed cost is the fixed cost total is going to remain same for a given level of activity. So per unit of fixed cost is going to vary. When it comes to semi-variable cost, the semi-variable cost is a certain part of the semi-variable cost is going to be remaining fixed. The other part is going to remain in the form of it is going to be in the what you call a variable nature. So let's take a problem to understand how these things are captured. With the following data for the 60% activity, prepare a budget for production at 80% and 100% capacity. So presently at 60% capacity, what is the cost the company is incurring? How many units the company has manufactured? We have given the details. Now in case your company is planning for 80% capacity and 100% capacity, so what will be the production company is going to do? How many units it is going to produce at a given capacity, and accordingly what will be the cost structure. So if you understand here, material is rupees 100 per unit, labor 40 rupees per unit, expenses 100 per 10 rupees per unit, factory expenses rupees 40,000. So out of this 40% is fixed, 60% is a variable. Administrative expenses 30,000, in the 60% is fixed and 40% is a variable. Now with the help of this information, we need to prepare a budget for 80% and 100% capacity. So what we are supposed to do is first at 60% capacity, how the cost structure looks, that we need to prepare, and taking that as a base, we need to go for 80% and 100%. So this is the format I have kept ready to in order to save the time in solving. If you look on the so at 60% capacity, presently a company is manufacturing 300 units. So the cost per unit and amount column is mentioned. At 80% and 100% capacity, how many units a company is going to manufacture? So let's do a small working note for that. So the number of units at 80% capacity will be 80 into 300 divided by 60, which means if at 60% company is manufacturing 300 units, at 80% how much? So if you do the cross multiplying, so you get this kind of a model. So that comes to 400 units. Similarly, at 100% capacity, how many units the company is going to manufacture? So 100 into 300 divided by 60. If you do, it comes to 500 units. So let's write down the cost structure. First you have to write the variable cost, then semi-variable cost, then any of the fixed cost if it is given for us. So in this problem, variable costs are basically here material, labor and expenses. So the per unit of material cost is given 100, labor it is 40, expense it is 10. So this variable cost per unit is going to remain same, whether it is at 300 units or whether it is 400 units or whether it is at 500 units. So accordingly here in this case it will be 100 into 300, 30,000, 40 into 300, then 10 into 300. So this take care of variable cost. When it comes to semi-variable cost, we have here factory expense. In the factory expense, 40% is fixed. So out of 40,000, 40% is fixed. So 40% of 40,000, if I calculate 40% of 40,000, so 16,000 is fixed. The remaining amount, that is out of 40,000, 16,000 is minus, so 24,000 is a variable. Now if I divide this 16,000 by 300 units, so I get per unit of a fixed factory expenses. Similarly, 24,000 divided by 300, I get 80. So I just take this up to 2 decimal places. Okay. Now moving on with the next item, that is administrative expenses. So out of 30,000, 60% is fixed. So again I categorize this administrative expense into 2 parts. One is fixed administrative expenses, variable administrative expenses. Accordingly, if 60% is fixed, 60% of 40,000, 24,000 is fixed. Sorry, it is a 60% of 30,000. I cancel this. 60% of 30,000, 18,000, balance 30,000 minus 18,000, 12,000 is variable. Again I calculate what is the per unit. So 18,000 divided by 300, it comes to 60. 12,000 divided by 300, it comes to 40. Now when you take the total, so the total, if I do of all these things, I get here 383.33, and if I take a total of all the cost together, I get 1,15,000. So at present we know at 300 units at 60% capacity, this is how the cost structure looks. Now what happens in case if you are going for 80% and 100%? So this variable cost per unit, it is going to remain same, whether it is at 80% or at 100%. Now in the factory expense, fixed factory expense amount is going to remain same, 16,000, because it is a fixed factory expense, whereas per unit of the factory variable cost is going to remain same. Similarly, when come to administrative expenses, fixed administrative expenses 18,000, amount will be same at 80% and at 100%, whereas variable administrative expense per unit is going to be same. Now having written these values, now what will be the total amount, how I am going to write up? So this 100 is multiplied with, at 80% the number of unit manufactured is 400. So 40 into 400, 10 into 400. So this 16,000 fixed factory expense, we need to divide this by 400 units. Whereas variable factory expense is already 80 rupees per unit, this 80 rupees should be multiplied with 400. Similarly, administrative expenses, fixed administrative expense 18,000, so per unit 18,000 divided by 400, it comes to 45. So 40 into 400. So in this way, at 80% capacity, the cost per unit comes to 355, whereas the total cost comes to 1,42,000. Now finally, when you are going for 100% capacity where you are manufacturing 500 units, so the cost pattern 100 into 500, 40 into 500, 10 into 500, whereas again 16,000 you divide by 500, so 80 into 500, so 18,000 divided by 500, 40 into 500, Now if you take the total of all these, you get 338. The total comes to 1,69,000. So which means the per unit, as the quantity, as we increase the production quantity, the per unit comes down, whereas the total cost will increase. So this is how at 60% capacity what happens, at 80% capacity what happens, and at 100% capacity how the cost structure is going to look. So the interesting point to note here is the variable cost per unit is going to remain constant at the different production levels, whereas the fixed cost amount is going to remain same, whereas per unit of fixed cost is going to reduce, or it's going to fall down as the quantity increases. So this is how the nature of variable cost, semi-variable cost and fixed cost is going to behave when you're preparing the flexible budget. So this is the first problem. So we have selected a simple problem to understand. Now let's move on to the second problem. Sorry. Okay. Now in the second problem, again prepare a flexible budget for overheads on the basis of the following data. Ascertain the overhead rate at 50% and 60% capacity. So you have given the variable overheads. At 60% capacity is already given. Indirect material, labor, semi-variable overheads. So under semi-variable overhead we have electricity, which is 40% fixed and 60% variable. Repairs 80% is fixed, 20% is variable. In addition to this, we also have fixed overheads, so which are going to remain same whether it is at 60% capacity or 50% capacity. So the total overhead is already given for us, it is 93,000. And the estimated direct labor hours at 60% capacity is 1,86,000 hours. Now in case if we reduce the capacity from 60% to 50%, so what will be the overhead rate that we need to find out. So again, so I prepared already the format again to save the time. So in this case, what's the difference in the previous problem and this problem here is, in the previous problem how many units were manufactured at different capacity was given. So here the estimated direct labor hours for given capacity is given, and in case if the capacity of work is reduced, now what will be the overhead rate that we need to find out. So given this situation, so let's put up the information first. Here when we look into the indirect materials, so labor, so these two are item of a variable cost. So I'll write here material 6,000, then 18,000 labor. Then when it comes to semi-variable overheads, electricity 40% fixed, 60% variable. So let me put up under the semi-variable cost, electricity I have written, fixed portion is how much? 40%. 40% of 30,000. The remaining 60% is variable. 60% of 30,000. So we are not going to calculate the cost per unit here. It is a cost per hour, labor hour. When it comes to the other cost like repairs, again we have two things. One is fixed and variable. 80% is fixed under the repairs, under the fixed 80% of 3,000, then 20% is variable, 20% of 3,000. Then finally we have a fixed overheads written as a fixed cost. So depreciation, insurance and salary, so these three values are going to remain same. 16,500, 4,500, 15,000. So accordingly, when you take the total of all these, we get the total overheads. So estimated direct labor as given is 1,86,000. So accordingly, if I calculate what is the overhead rate, So if I divide the total overheads by divided by the estimated direct labor hours, that is 1,86,000, I get 0.50. So this is the present case when it is running at 60% capacity. Now in case if it goes to 50% capacity, what happens? So we are given this information. Now the material is 6,000 rupees at 60% capacity. If it is 50% capacity, then it is going to be how much? So proportionately we need to find out. That is 50% means I write 50 multiplied by 6,000 divided by 60. So the material cost is going to be 5,000. Accordingly, labor cost. So again I'll write here 50 into 18,000 divided by 60. So it will become 15,000. So it comes to electricity. So electricity, the fixed cost is going to remain same, 12,000 only, whereas variable cost is going to vary. So 18,000 is a variable cost if it is 60%. So in case if it is 50% means how much? So again what we have to do is 50 into 18,000 divided by 60. It comes to 15,000. So to bring it proportionately. Similarly, under the repairs, fixed is 2,400. So this fixed amount remains the same. Only the variable part is going to be calculated proportionately. So 50 into 600 divided by 60. It comes to 500. So all these fixed costs which we had incurred, they are going to remain the same. Depreciation, insurance and salaries are going to remain same even at the 50% capacity. So accordingly, if I take the total now, so the total overheads comes to 85,900. But what about the direct labor hours? So at 60% capacity, it was 1,86,000. Now at 50% capacity, what will be the direct labor hours? So we'll calculate here a small working note. So for 60% capacity, the direct labor hours spent was 1,86,000. So for 50% capacity, so 50 into 1,86,000 divided by 60, it comes to 1,55,000. So accordingly, the direct labor, overhead rate per hour will be 85,900 divided by 1,55,000. It comes to 0.55. So I'm just taking again it to 2 decimal places. So if you see the difference here, so in case if the instead of 60% capacity, if we just work at a 50% capacity, then the overhead rate is going to increase by 5 paisa. So this is because the fixed overheads are going to remain the same. So only a certain slight change may happen only in case of variable overheads. And this is the reason, so company irrespective of whether they go for 30% capacity or 40% capacity, some of the fixed costs they are supposed to bear, and due to which the overhead cost is going to per hour overhead rate is going to increase if the production is reduced. So this is another type of a problem where how the flexible budgets are used in determining the overheads. So let's move on to the third problem. So in the third problem, so the expense budgeted for production of 1000 units in a factory are furnished below. So this is regarding to 1000 units. If the company manufactures, what are the various costs it is going to incur? So particulars per unit amount is given. Material cost is going to be 700 rupees per unit, labor 250, variable overhead 200, selling expenses, so it is going to be 20% fixed. So out of 130 rupees whatever the information given, 20% is going to be the fixed selling expense. Administrative expense, total it is 2 lakhs, per unit comes to 200. Total cost is 1480. Prepare a budget for production of 600 units and 800 units. assuming administrative expenses are rigid for all level of production, which means the administrative expense 2 lakh is going to be same whether it is 1000 units, 600 units or 800 units. So accordingly, even in selling expenses also 20% being the fixed selling expenses, so that portion of 20% once we calculate for 1000 units, so the same amount is going to be there even for 600 units and for 800 units. So let's only prepare only for 1000 units how the cost structure looks. Okay, so again the solution on flexible budgets. So 1000 units is what they have given the details, and accordingly we should go for 600 units and 800 units. So first variable cost, then comes semi-variable cost, then fixed cost. So under the variable cost we are having material, labor and variable overheads. So again per unit values, so 700, 250, variable overhead is 200. Then we are also given selling expenses 20% fixed. So under the semi-variable overhead I write fixed selling expense, variable selling expense. So under the fixed selling expense it is 20% is fixed. So it is 20% of 130, that comes to 20% of 130, that comes to 26 rupees. The remaining 80% is variable. 80% of 130, that comes to 104. So administrative expense per unit is given, it is 200, and the total amount is also given as 2 lakhs. Okay, so let's calculate what will be the answers. So this 700 is multiplied with 1000 units. Accordingly, labor 250 is multiplied with 1000 units. 200 multiplied with 1000. So fixed selling expenses 26 multiplied with 1000. Variable is 104 multiplied with 1000. Administrative expenses again, already it is given for us 200 into 1000, that is 2 lakhs. So if you take the total of all these, we get a total cost, and the amount and total cost for manufacturing 1000 unit comes to 14,80,000. Now what happens in case if company goes for 600 units and 800 units? So this cost per unit variable cost is going to remain same. Now under the fixed selling expenses, so 26,000, the total amount of fixed expense is going to remain same. 26,000, 26,000. Then similarly variable selling expense per unit is going to remain same, 104, 104. Whereas administrative expenses, as they are told, it is going to remain same. So 2 lakh rupees, it's not 200, it is a 2 lakh rupees fixed amount. 2 lakh, it is going to remain same. So in this way we need to structure that particular cost pattern for the given estimated units, and accordingly now we need to get the values. So 700 multiplied with 600 units. Accordingly just tag the formula. So 26,000 is the total, fixed selling expense. So 26,000 divided by 600 units. So 104 multiplied by 600 units. Administrative expenses 2 lakh divided by 600. Now if you take the total of all this, we get 1630.7. So which means if you manufacture lesser number of units, the cost per unit is going to increase. Instead of 1480, you need to be incurring 1630. Now accordingly for 800 units, what happens? So 700 into 800. So I'll just take the values. 26,000 divided by 800, 104 multiplied by 800. 2 lakh is the fixed administrative, 2 lakh divided by 800. Now again if I take the total, so it comes to 1536.5. So now if you compare the among all the threes, so if we manufacture 600 units, the cost per unit comes to 1630. If we slightly increase the production, so we will be going for 1536. But in case if we manufacture 1000 units, we will be incurring 1480. So the main point that we need to understand here is, it is the as the production increases, the fixed cost per unit is going to reduce. So here if you observe here, the fixed cost is coming to 26 rupees, whereas if you go for 600 unit it comes to 43. If you go for 800 it comes to 32.5. Accordingly, the administrative expenses, if you observe, 200 from 202 it is moving to 333, and then it comes down to 250. So this is the behavior of the fixed cost and variable cost while preparing the flexible budget. So this is how the third problem looks once it is prepared. There is a slight disturbance which is happening, so on the other side some sound is happening. Kindly cooperate. So finally we look into one more problem, that is the fourth problem, which is again slightly interesting. Now, having understood the nature of how the cost factors are going to behave, we also try to look into the impact on the profits. Now in the fourth problem, if you again go through, a factory is currently working at 50% capacity and produces 30,000 units, and also sold each unit at rupees 225. Prepare a flexible budget and estimate the profit of the company when it works at 75% capacity and 90% capacity. Assume that all units produced are sold at the same selling price per unit as shown above. The following information is provided to you. So variable cost, material, labor and other expenses per unit is given. Semi-variable cost at 50% capacity. So these are the details of semi-variable cost. Under the fixed expenses, so office and management salaries, office and factory rents, like this they are given as the fixed expenses. Now the additional information is very interesting. Semi-variable expenses remain constant up to 60% of capacity. They increases by 10% between 60% and 80% capacity, which means if you see presently at 60% capacity only, we at 50% capacity, this is how the cost structure looks. So till 60% level, that is up to 59%, the cost pattern remains the same. But once the production starts reaches the 60% and move up to 80%, okay, capacity level, 60 to 80% capacity if you are manufacturing, then the semi-variable expenses are going to increase by 10%. And in case if the production capacity, again if it increases from 80% to 100% level, if it ranges, then the semi-variable cost is going to increase by 20%. Next, the rate per unit of variable expense remains same. So the variable expense which is mentioned here, it is going to remain same irrespective of whether it is at 50%, 75% or 90% capacity. Now given these details, how does we prepare a flexible budget? So let's look into the details. So again, this is the format which is kept ready. Now at 50% capacity we are manufacturing 30,000 units. Then at 75,000 at 75% and 90%, how many units will be manufacturing? So again, let's do a small working note. So number of units at 75% capacity, because in this problem we are given two capacities, one is at 75% and another one is at 90% capacity. So I'll just take a working note here. Number of units at 75% capacity, number of units at 90% capacity. So at 75% capacity, how many units we are going to manufacture? So 75% into, at present 30,000 we are manufacturing, divided by 50. because at 50% we are manufacturing 30,000 units. At 75%, how much it is? So if we do the calculation, I'll just copy this part, put formula is equal to, and paste it. So we get 45,000. Similarly, at 90% capacity, 90 into 30,000 divided by 50. So you get 54,000. So it is 45,000 and 54,000. I'll just write here, at 75% capacity we will be manufacturing 45,000 units. At 90% capacity we will be manufacturing 54,000 units. Now let's put up the information. Material per unit is 60, then labor it is 40, 15. So this material per unit is going to remain the same for all the levels. Now when it comes to labors, the values are given: 1,50,000, 2,10,000, 2,70,000, repair and maintenance 1,20,000, finally 1,80,000. This is for the semi-variable cost. Now the next one is fixed expenses. Under fixed expenses, so all the fixed expenses are going to remain same: 5,40,000, then 6 lakh, 7,20,000, 4,50,000. So these fixed expenses are going to remain same for all the levels. Now with regarding to the other details, now what happens here? Now material is 60 rupees per unit, so 60 multiplied by 30,000. Similarly, labor 40 into 30,000, 15 into 30,000. Now when it comes to semi-variable cost, so each of the semi-variable costs you divide by 30,000. Accordingly, you get a per unit. So 2,10,000 divided by 30,000, then comes 2,70,000 divided by 30,000. Like this, if we do, we get a semi-variable cost per unit. Now fixed expenses, so the total amount remains the same, but per unit when you want to calculate, again this divided by 30,000. So accordingly we should divide all the fixed expenses by 30,000, get per unit. So when I take the addition of all this, so I get what is known as the total cost. This is per unit cost. Similarly, the total of the amount column, if we do, we get a total cost of 30,000 units. So we are given the selling price. So the selling price is given as 225. So 225 multiplied with 30,000. So accordingly, the profit per unit here it comes to 2 rupees. So 2 rupees multiplied by 30,000. So this part is ready. Now accordingly, what happens for the at 75,000 75% and 90% capacity? So 60 material per unit 60 multiplied with 45,000. Similarly, here also 60 multiplied with 54,000. So I'll just drag this. Here also I'll just drag it because there's a formula inserted. So you need to just multiply 40 into 54,000, 15 into 54,000, you get the values. Sorry, here there is a formula: 60 into 54,000. So Okay, next 40 into 54, 15 into 54. Now when it comes to semi-variable cost, so what they have said is in the adjustment, semi-variable cost is going to increase by 10% if the production capacity is between 60 to 80%, and it is going to be 20% between 80 and 100%. Now this semi-variable cost we need to increase by 10% when it is 75%, and we need to increase 20% when it comes to 90% levels. So what do I do is I just take up 1,50,000 plus I'll add up 10% of 1,50,000. So 1,50,000 plus 10% of 1,50,000 if we do, we get 1,65,000. Similarly, 2,10,000 plus 10% of 2,10,000. In this way, we need to just go on calculating 10% of the value, and this we need to divide by, all these values need to be divided by 45,000. So that will come to know what is the per unit rate. I rounded off to one decimal place. Similarly, on the other side, here if you are going for 54,000 units, so semi-variable cost is going to increase by 20%. So again, I'll just go with the formula. So 1,50,000 plus 20% of 1,50,000. In the same way, indirect materials also. First I'm going to select 2,10,000 plus 20% of 2,10,000. So in this way we need to calculate for the others. So now divide 1,80,000 by 54,000 units. Similarly, divide 2,52,000 by 54,000 units. So in this way, if we keep dividing these values by 54,000 units, we get a cost per unit. So this is with regarding to semi-variable cost. Now how about the fixed cost? So fixed cost is going to remain the same. Total amount of fixed cost is going to remain same. Per unit of fixed cost is going to differ. So all these fixed costs need to be divided by number of units. So in this case, first unit is 5,40,000 divided by 45,000. In a similar way, 6 lakh divided by 45, you keep on doing like this, get the cost per unit. Similarly, 5,40,000 divided by 54,000. Similarly, 6 lakh divided by 54, 7,20,000 divided by 54, we have to do it. So having done all these calculations, now find out the cost per unit total by adding all these columns. You get the total values. Now since the selling price is kept as same, so accordingly the total value 225 into 45,000, here you get 225 into, here we are manufacturing 54,000. So the profit per unit in this case will be selling price minus the cost price. You get 35.93. So accordingly the total profit 45,000. So you get 16,17,000. Here in this case will be 225 minus 178.44, so you get 46.55. 46.55 multiplied with 54,000. So this is how the profit per unit is computed. Now what's the interesting point to observe here in this problem? Now the profit in case of 60% capacity, 50% capacity, we had earned just 2 rupees. Whereas if the production capacity is increased from 50% to 75%, where the number of units increases by 15,000, okay, so what happens? So the interesting part here is, no doubt the semi-variable cost is going to increase, but the cost per unit is going to come down. Okay, point number 1. Point number 2, the fixed expenses also is going to get reduces, and accordingly, even if we keep the same selling price, but if the volume is increased, then obviously the profit is going to be more. Similarly, if you go with still more higher capacity, so instead of 30,000, if you manufacture 54,000, so what will happen? So the cost per unit is going to fall down drastically, and accordingly the profit per unit is going to be more. So this is the advantage of the higher volume, and without changing the selling price, if you increase the volume of production, so the fixed cost per unit is going to fall down, and accordingly semi-variable cost is going to just add to a smaller percentage increase, whereas the profit is going to be higher. In this way, the problems on flexible budgets are solved. So the main point we need to understand in case of while solving flexible budget is how the cost patterns are going to behave. And if you know the nature of a fixed cost, semi-variable cost, so accordingly we can calculate for what is the given problem, or we can prepare the flexible budget for whatever the problem is suggested. So I hope the things are clear. In case if you have any query, you can drop always a mail to my email. Thank you.